Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. Justin, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Good to be here today.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have you, and it's so nice to meet you. I really do. I enjoy learning about the leaders that I get the privilege to meet. And sometimes it's from articles that they've written, and sometimes it's from interviews that they've given. So I did that. I was like, Googling you and learning a little bit more about you. And I listened to an interview that you gave about career connections. And then when I went to your website, which I'm really impressed, your goals are like front and center. And, one of your goals, goal 2.1 for those keeping score, is to build strategic partnerships. Now, partnerships can have multiple meanings, right? So they can be the different ways that you've approached that term. And so, actually, that's kind of my question, because it could be, leveraging relationships for career pathways. It could be meeting the mental health needs of children, which, has never been more important than today. So I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the different ways that you've approached that term partnerships for yourself and your community?
Absolutely. So we have a strategic plan with 4 pillars, and one of those pillars is partnership. And when you think about a small school district, partnerships matter for all school districts, whether you're large or small. And what's unique about small school districts is we have very few resources when it comes to depth within the organization or layers within the organization. And we rely heavily on our partners in our local community to help us reach our goals. And I think the biggest area that we have seen since COVID is our need around mental health, social services, supporting our students in transitional housing. And we know that, the state does its best to give us the funding we need, but they're far from meeting that goal. And so in order for us to really strengthen our access to kids, we've had to create those partnerships. I think one thing we're so proud of is that we have mental health counselors in every school, providing not just tier 1 or tier 2 needs, but we also have partnerships with our hospital and literally across the street from our district office, where we have psychologists, psychiatrists working with our kids who need tier 3 services and intervention, as well as working with that family unit. It's a really unique program that we have here. And it could only happen because of the foundations, the Island Health Foundation, our Anacortes Schools Foundation, a little bit of grant money from Skagit County. And when we think about combining those resources together, we've been able to create some unique programs and access for kids.
That's fantastic. It makes me think of a similar partnership through our county in Missouri that the residents of the community chose to tax themselves for a children's services fund. And this was to support essentially mental health supports and things like that. And so as you were describing the partnerships you have with the local hospital, with local psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health providers, we did what was essentially like a mental health questionnaire, a survey, a screener type of thing we always know who needs help for those externalizers, right? You have to clear a classroom, those types of things. A child makes it known they're in crisis. And then there are the quiet internalizers that we sometimes miss. And so I'm kind of curious how you and your team, as you're building these partnerships and meeting the needs of children, how you've kind of worked on that. It sounds like, based on your head nodding, that's something that you've not forgotten.
Yeah. One of the things that I value in leadership in general, what I spend a lot of time trying to unpack and grow in as a leader is systemic thinking and building systems of predictable support. And one of those areas that we know is that, it's a statewide initiative to think about the multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS model. And that's not just for academics. So we have intentionally designed tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 services. And through that work, we've been able to identify which students need those services, when and how. And so for tier 1, we've implemented social emotional learning and curriculum across all of our schools. So every kid, no matter their background, no matter who they are, they're getting access to the same instruction around social emotional health. And then we know that not all kids are successful with that instruction and need additional supports. And so we've got staff on site who provide levels of support, whether it's counselors or our social workers or our mental health therapists who our community has graciously funded. And then through those surveys, through Panorama and other resources, we're able to identify kids for those tier 2 interventions, or the students, the few who need tier 3. And that's where the Island Health has been really powerful, is to have that kind of, we have monthly meetings with their medical team, making sure our kids are getting individualized care and the family unit is getting the support that they need.
I love it. I read that I think it's more than 40% of superintendents in Washington state where you are in their first or second year, I think. And that is not, I mean, that's an astounding number or percentage. And then it's kind of the story across the nation. And so as your colleagues are inheriting districts that may not have had these systems in place, what might be some advice that you would offer as as a leader who's leading this work? Like a first step, because you can't
Yeah.
take it all.
First step is listening and learning. I mean, I think I have definitely made a lot of mistakes, and I would say that those mistakes always stem from not listening or engaging the right people or
Yeah.
sitting
Yeah.
down, right? And
Yeah. Or
co-designing with
there's a
people.
habit of systems thinking that is associated with the avoiding the impulse to make a quick decision. You're like, oh, I got
Yeah.
this.
The system says or research says, so let's just build
Right,
this.
right, right. Oh, people
Yeah.
do that. Yeah. My
Yeah.
favorite one was
Yeah.
when I told people that, class size really doesn't matter. Ooh, yeah. That didn't go so well for me.
Right,
Even if
right.
it doesn't.
Yeah, the biggest lesson I've learned through my own failures as well as through my successes is co-design. You have to co-design with people. You have to have iterative cycles of co-design in order to build momentum, buy-in, shared meaning and understanding. And I'm a firm believer that a strategic plan is just a strategic plan on paper if you don't actually co-design it with people. And it has to be a living and breathing process that will evolve based on the feedback that you're receiving and actively searching.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying because when I think about this idea you called shared meaning, and I like to refer to it as like this shared image, right? A shared image of what success looks like. And your first piece of advice, I think, is totally the way that any one of us, and sometimes we forget, is to listen, to see where do we have common ground and where can we find that shared image of what we want for children. And often that is asking this sort of overarching question of what do we want to create together? And that really opens up some pretty interesting and just, I think, marvelous conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're just joining us on An Imperfect Leader, my guest today is Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District. Now, in the leadership model that I use, there are three dimensions. There's collective aspiration, there's nested patterns, there's the leaders learning work. And inside the dimension leaders learning work, that's where systems thinking and design thinking live. And I came across your superintendent and board decision-making process. Again, this is brilliant. I mean, it's some of the biggest issues for superintendents, especially new ones, are like when it comes to roles or responsibilities. And so would you tell us how you use this process to make
Yeah.
decisions? And I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Sure. This particular document has been an evolution over time since I was a principal. And then I used it in my role as an assistant superintendent and now superintendent. And it's only been refined over the years. And I think the challenge we face as leaders is that when we're making decisions, the best decisions are those that are shared. Those are the ones that are co-designed with people, but you can't always co-design everything. Otherwise you would just be in standstill. And so I think it's
Right.
important when you're pulling a group of people together who are investing their time and energy and passion in a decision that they know upfront what level of decision or what influence they have in that decision. I know personally, I hate being asked at the table to provide feedback and then my feedback isn't used. Or I think I get to be a part of the decision, but in fact, I'm not a part of the decision. And then maybe I wouldn't have even come to the table. And so I think it's critical that when we are making decisions, when we're planning strategy, when we're moving improvement efforts forward, that you think about who is at the table. It's also important to think about who's not at the table, who isn't represented. And then when you bring people to the table, you're really clear, like, this is a decision that I'm making, but I value your input and your input will inform my decision. Or I'm not making the decision. This is a collective decision. And through shared consensus, we're going to make this together. Or in those rare situations where you say, this is an emergency. I'm making this decision without input. And that should be very few times, right? So that's what this shared decision-making process is, just making really clear about what my goals are and what my hopes are, not just for me, but for every leader in our organization.
Yeah. And what I thought was really interesting about it was that there's a part on the document that really makes it clear what the superintendent is not responsible for, that the board sometimes actually has to make decisions that you get to provide input, but don't make the decision. And sometimes in a community, the title superintendent conveys this image of sort of this, omnipowerful, figurehead who gets to decide everything. And it's like, actually, there are parts. And one part of that is like the budget. The superintendent makes a recommendation. The board typically is the one who approves the budget. In certain states, like New York, the whole community votes on the budget. Every year they vote on it. In Connecticut, the superintendent and the board resolve around, they come together on a budget and then they submit it to the city. And the city then decides how much of the budget they approve and then they send it back to the board for its continued work. So I
Yeah.
kind of prefer the 7-member board who takes input from the community and the administration and makes that decision. And most
Yeah.
of the time they rely on the superintendent to provide that budget, but they're the ones
Yeah.
who ultimately. So
Right.
I was hoping, just kind of thinking through this process that you use, because all across the nation, districts are now trying to navigate budget shortfalls. They're working on building reserves. They're maybe planning for uncertain and ever changing times. And so I wonder how would this process work for you as you're thinking about budget planning?
Yeah. Well, 3 years ago, we, like many districts in the state, realized that we are on a cliff and that sooner than later, we're going to use up all of our fund balance reserves. So 3 years ago, we began a process where I had iterative cycles of feedback. I really believe in those iterative loops where you have multiple groups giving you feedback and you don't necessarily pull everybody together at the same time. And then you're transparent about what feedback you're getting from those groups, right? So our first approach, and actually context matters. So I just hired a new finance director, and so he was learning our budget at the same time. So he and I are relatively new to the district. And so we decided, let's build a zero balance approach. Let's zero out everything in our budget. Let's start from scratch and let's educate our community and our staff about what each of those budget items, what they fund. And so we then went through a filter process of building back the budget based on what is required by law or contract. And we added all that money back into line items. And then we had another filter of what is essential. So it's not necessarily required, it's not by law, but we feel that these items are essential in order for us to manage. So, for example, the state doesn't fully fund recess supervisors, but we know we need the recess supervisors on the playground. It's not law, it's not contract, but if we don't have them on the playground, kids are going to get hurt. So that's essential. We're going to make sure that we have adequate staffing on the playground. And then the third is discretionary. What is it that we really want, but might not be able to afford? And so we built back that budget. We basically told the community and staff, these are the things that we have to do by law and contract. And then let's look at and unpack what is essential and what is discretionary. And that first year, what we really identified at that time, we had a $45 million budget. We had to cut $3 million out of that $45 million budget. By the time that we looked at what was required by law and contract, 40 million of that $45 million budget was already taken up. So now we have a narrow scope. We have $5 million.
Right. And then I've listened to you talk about pathways for students. So whether it's like, shipbuilding or aeronautics or culinary, or those are that third tier of like, this is why kids come to school. They're not coming
Yes.
for okay. So you've got 3 million to cut, and basically 5 million is, what you're cutting from.
Right. And the other filter that we had as a group and was the vision that was guided by our school board, which I really appreciate, is that we are going to cut farthest from the classroom first. And that we're here in the business of educating children. And so let's protect the classroom. And so that was another filter that we used when we determined what was discretionary and what was essential. And so, yeah, we had some hard discussions, but what it did is it really allowed the community to understand that none of these decisions are good, but we really don't have a lot of wiggle room. And there really isn't a lot of choice when it comes to it. And so that was the first year. And our second year, since we rebuilt the budget based on those parameters, we started the plus minus approach of, okay, what is it that we have to add based on new contract language with bargaining? What new laws or unfunded mandates are required at the state level? We build all of those additions into the budget. And then we identify what our target amount is that we have to reduce. And we start identifying through a budget advisory council again, what is it that we need to reduce, thinking through what's discretionary and essential. And that was year 2 of our budget advisory council. And now year 3, we have cut so much farthest from the classroom, and we have impacted classroom. I don't want to disregard that, but we have cut so much that at this point, I can't even go out to the community and talk about it because we're talking about individual people's jobs and their contracts. So to go out into the budget process and make it public, you can't do it. So what's beautiful is that for the last 2 years, our community's been engaged. So that the banter on Facebook now is somebody makes a comment that is negative about us not being transparent. Somebody from the Budget Advisory Council will link something on our website or will start to say, no, this is what the process that we used. And they're countering that narrative.
I love it. And it's not you and it's not defensive. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Here's a link to transparency or how we've making decisions. here's the process we use to make decisions. And there are times where they can't talk about it because it talks about personnel. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
pretty marvelous. Two things came to mind. One is when we were doing zero-based budgeting, it really was a shift in our culture. And because leaders would feel as if they didn't spend everything down, they weren't going to get the funds again the next year. And we would say, tell us exactly what you need,
Yeah.
and we will endeavor to give you what you need, as opposed to, it looks like last year, a week before we freeze any more additional spending because we're pretty much at the end of the year, you, over the last 5 years, make this major purchase of like paper and things that you're encumbering funds for next year in this fiscal year. And quite frankly, you can't do that. And so it really did shift to trying to create this level of trust of saying, what do you need? And then we'll try to provide it as best as we can. The other thing it made me think about was a leader who actually was on this program once, who used this term karma points. You can cut things that are cuttable. You also have to associate the emotional impact of that cut. It may seem small, and yet it will have a ripple effect throughout your small community because everyone cared about that crossing guard. There's a reason why everyone
Right.
feels that they belong, because that person's welcoming everyone every morning. Yet it may not have been the most essential job, yet it becomes essential to the mission
Yep.
that you're trying to do. So
And one of my measures for success is, and by no means have I reached it every time, is that people can come forward and say, I don't like the decision, but I was a part of the process and I understand why the decision was made.
Yeah.
And we've had multiple situations like that. And it personal, when we're talking about people's personal livelihoods, I mean, look, these people have dedicated years of service to our kids in our community, and suddenly they don't have a job and they don't have a livelihood.
Right.
they
And
can't
you're
pay
the
rent.
new guy in town. And our
Yes.
family's been here. We have deep roots. We
Yes.
founded this community.
Yeah. Can never lose sight of the human side of this, ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is about human centered leadership. And so I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every guest who comes on the program. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Yeah. An imperfect leader to me, I mean, nobody is perfect. There's no such thing as the most effective leader. There isn't. We all make mistakes. And I believe in vulnerability. Maybe sometimes I'm too vulnerable, but I want to create an environment where, I think it was Keegan that said, we spend so much of I'm butchering it, but basically we spend so much of our capital trying to cover up our weaknesses that we waste time. And so what if we all actually exposed our weaknesses so that everybody on our team could help fill in where those weaknesses are? I have weaknesses. I have strengths too, and I can't be everything. And so how do I collectively bring people together to say, Justin's strength is not this, but my strength is. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm at the table during these conversations. Right. And so what I really try to do is make sure that we are allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to own our weakness. We're not judged for it, but we're judged for how we manage it.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader, called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. Now, in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. So, Justin, what happened?
Well, when you ask me this question, it's, of course, there's multiple opportunities to go back in time and redo something, right? And I was waffling between two different ideas. One was around, in my role as an assistant superintendent in a large urban school district, dismantling the after school childcare program and rebuilding it. And I think most recently is in 2020 when I became a superintendent during the pandemic here in Anacortes, inheriting a momentum around rethinking and redesigning our highly capable program. So
Yeah. All right. So you think which one?
let's focus on the highly capable since that was in my role as a superintendent. Yeah.
I'm so glad you chose that. I have many sort of my own thoughts about it as well. And so I'd be curious to see where it goes. And then if you see me sort of go off camera and I'm in the corner in a fetal position, there's a reason, but we'll get to that. So here we go.
Well, great. Well, I guess I'll start with, context matters. I was hired as the superintendent in February of 2020. I didn't really even understand that there was a worldwide pandemic. Kind of knew something about COVID was happening. And then suddenly the world shuts down and I then roll into this position thinking, okay, it's just going to be a few months, right?
Oh my gosh. And really, the Seattle and Western Washington was really that, and New York were sort of,
The
ground
first,
zero for this.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we
yeah,
were in the Midwest sort of watching going, well, that looked bad. And so, yeah, wow. Okay. So,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you were taking over right at that time?
Right at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my, Justin. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was an emotional roller coaster. Say, and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the community. I didn't know staff. My first meetings with staff were all online, and when I do see them, we're wearing masks. So they were people that I did not even recognize a year later when they took their masks off. Right. So it was a traumatic experience as a leader navigating that. But in any case, I come in, and my first job, of course, is just crisis management. Like, how do we navigate closing schools? How do we navigate online learning? How do we create a schedule? How do I partner with our unions? How do I partner with the community? How am I communicating? And during this time, I was meeting occasionally with staff, and I had a couple staff and leaders who came forward and talked about this move that they had been studying over the years, moving to a blended model with high cap, and really rethinking and redesigning how we deliver high cap instruction especially for our secondary students. And so,
And high cap
um,
is highly capable.
yeah, highly capable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's called different things in different parts of the country. So just for those
Yeah.
who are listening.
Yeah. Or advanced placement courses, right? Or AP courses, and rethinking through, like, AP for all, right? Or a blended model, instead of really the move was moving away from having singleton classes where cohorts of students who are gifted and talented are in the class together and not interacting with other age level peers. They are on their own track. And so the movement that I was told is that the district had been looking to blend some of those classes and courses so that students were in more heterogeneous settings. And so,
And yet, if they wanted to sort of contract for an honors type of thing, they could still take an AP
yeah,
course, and then their peers maybe studying similar themes, maybe different books,
yeah,
but having enriching conversations together.
yeah, right, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
And so this is what I was told. And the other context to know is the assistant superintendent who ended up leaving at the same time I came. So and we're a small district, so all institutional knowledge was gone. Right. So all I have is a
Oh
few
my
notes and a few
gosh.
conversations. So
Oh
there's
my
no
gosh.
institutional knowledge. I hire a new assistant superintendent, and we are trying to figure this out together. And so I made the mistake of listening to a few key community members and staff and saying, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it sounds like you've been working on this for a while. We're going to move forward with this. And as soon as that first year of COVID, things were fine. Like, everyone were doing remote learning. Nobody even really noticed. It was just like everybody was in chaos. People were trying to just meet their basic needs. But the second year, when we actually came back to in-person learning,
Yeah.
even though we were 6 feet apart, wearing masks, all this, suddenly everyone's starting to see, well, there's a different model here. And when this
Oh
who
man.
made that decision? And did the new superintendent just made this happen without telling anyone? And then suddenly, and I'm hearing from my board saying, Justin, what's happening? The board wasn't even aware of it. And so I suddenly, I met with the board, we talked about it. And first thing I did is, we have to pause. We're pausing. Like, I don't even understand the problem we're trying to solve. The community doesn't understand. The staff don't understand. And no one's on the same page here. So we are pausing all decisions at this point forward, and we're going to engage people. And so
However, school has started, right? I mean, so
yeah,
schedules
yep,
have been created. Teachers are
yep,
teaching,
yep,
so
yep, yep.
I'm
There
curious
were a
about
few
what
courses
pausing
that have
looks
moved
like.
to this model.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we had to, we were moving forward with the classes that were already in the model. We put a pause on any other future
Gotcha.
classes moving to this
Okay.
new model. And so my assistant superintendent and I together, strategized, and we ended up to give her a lot of credit. She is an amazing leader. We constructed multiple community focus group committees to focus on all of these hot topic issues, whether it be another hot topic issue was NGSS standard implementation. The other was high cap. So we had all this a blended model. So we brought together community and staff with really clear charters in place of what the role of the committee was, what the decision-making process was going to look like, what the outcomes were going to be. And rolled up our sleeves and tried to figure it out. At the same time, what I realized is that in our strategic plan that I inherited, there were not a lot of really clear measurable outcomes. There was really clear vision, really clear mission, and really clear big picture actions to take, but not a lot of key performance indicators or key performance outcomes to really measure our progress. So at the same time as this was happening, I was engaging the board and a superintendent advisory council of community members to rethink through not changing the strategic plan much, but really honing it to think about what are our key outcomes that we can measure along the way. And that also helped us get really clear about what we were doing and why we were doing it and what equity meant. So throughout this whole conversation of dismantling high cap, the narrative got spread out about social justice and inaccuracies were being shared about what it means to be an equity leader. And so we had to really define as a group, what does equity mean for our school district? What does that mean for highly capable? And so through these multiple iterative processes, we were able to actually come to a consensus around what it meant. And then ultimately I had to make a decision on where to go. And there were many community members who were unhappy with the decision, but they were okay because they were a part of the process and didn't like the decision, but felt like we compromised. Right. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so a lot came from that, but I remember a second year we're in masks sitting 6 feet apart in our auditorium at a board meeting, and the bright lights are shining on us because we had to be in this large auditorium, couldn't see the people in the audience. And all I have is, angry comment after comment about inaccuracies around
You're
what
like,
equity means. Right. What is equity? And we're doing this in the name of social justice, and equity and equality are being confused by community members. And,
yes. Do you know, I even
um,
had a strategist on the show a couple of weeks ago, and their episode will launch in a few weeks. And they said there's even a confusion around equity, thinking about people's home values, about
yes,
equity. And I
yes,
thought, oh
yes.
my gosh.
Yeah,
Okay. So,
yeah,
yeah. So equity, equality, and then the sort of financial equity. It's like, wow.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
And yet it all gets blended up into this, soup that makes no sense to people as you're really talking about. No, we're talking about because kids, what we
Yep.
want for children
Yep.
and getting what children need. Let me go to the protocols here. This is, as my mentor would say, a juicy topic, and one that I think lots of people are wrestling with, particularly around giving children what they need, trying to figure out the best way to think about staffing. And so you've got, brilliant teachers who sometimes have only, a very small class of highly capable kids. And we want to leverage their strength to teach all kids because, academic, ability doesn't necessarily translate about a child who's hardworking and has ideas and wants to learn. And so, how do you create these heterogeneous classes while still meeting the needs of children and also being mindful of trying not to overwhelm teachers, trying to meet the needs of so many different children and their needs. So, okay, this is a lot. But
You
what?
summed that up beautifully.
No, I
Yeah.
pulling out my hair only because this really is something that I think leaders all across the nation are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
How do you dismantle tracking and also recognize that a child who aspires for a certain career or has real interest, we don't want to extinguish that. We want to, amplify that. And we want to also try to light the fires for so many children. I mean, that's the essence of public schools. So what it sounds like one of the things that got overlooked was going to your community elders to some extent. I think you refer to them as key players or key thought leaders, as opposed to really harvesting the wisdom of the community as a whole. That's one piece that got overlooked. Would you say anything more to that?
Well, I think that the bigger issue is, what are we trying to solve? And nobody could answer that question. I mean, let me rephrase that. People could answer the question, but the answers were different. And so,
Yes.
so you can't move or change. You shouldn't address change if people don't even understand what the problem is to begin with, and without doing a needs analysis first. And there was no needs analysis. It was just,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
so,
so maybe what got overlooked is you inherited this plan and you started executing.
right. But the plan I learned wasn't even socialized. It wasn't socialized with the board or with anyone else. And so I don't even know
That's
if the
right.
plan
That's
was.
right. You said the board said,
Yeah.
"Hey, man, what's going on? What are we
Yeah.
doing?"
Yeah. And so I don't want to, I'm not trying to throw the other superintendent under the bus.
No,
Maybe
no.
maybe this wasn't a plan, right? Well, it was my mistake. I didn't,
Yeah, I didn't
stop
take away that you
pause,
were. Yeah,
and listen, right? And so what I should have done is said, okay, this is what I'm hearing. There was a key group of people who are interested in pursuing this model, let's pause. I appreciate your passion. Let's try to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. Let's look at the data. Let's look at, everything from lagging to leading data. Let's engage our community. Let's engage our staff, and let's try to understand what is it that we're currently doing that aligns with best practice? What does the research say? What are the gaps between what we're doing and what best practice says? What is the data telling us? And then let's build what a shared understanding and a common action plan with people to fill those gaps. That would have been the right strategy. And that's what we ended up doing. But
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to say, what was something that's good that came out of it in one moment? Before that, I want to ask you a question that I think really speaks to leadership, human-centered leadership. What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
Oh gosh, understanding the context of where you serve is so important. Understanding the key players, understanding the needs of the community. If you are a servant leader, you serve. And you can't serve unless you know the needs and understand the context of who you're serving. And so that was my big lesson, is I just can't move from what was happening in another school district and transfer it to this school district. We are a completely different entity. We're a completely different community with different needs. And it's important to build trust and relationships with people so that they can move with you. And not to say that everyone will always move with you, but the majority should. And you're not going to please everybody. We know that. So that's been the biggest lesson. And I think through many of these hard discussions and conflicts, I've built some really lasting relationships and advisors in the community who are blunt and frank. We can be blunt and frank with each other. Like I said earlier, we can share our vulnerabilities with each other. I have members of this community that I can show all my cards, be completely vulnerable with, and say, I don't have the answer. Help me. Or I
That
made
speaks
a
a
mistake.
lot to the relationships you built in such a short time, because sometimes the response is, that's not my job. That's why they pay you to be the superintendent. And you say, and so your takeaway there is, I mean, sometimes it's frustration. At the same time, it's also, you have to do your own self-reflection. I haven't built enough of a relationship with this individual that they want to step into this arena with me. They just want to throw things from the audience. And so it really does speak to, whether you realize it or not, how quickly you have built some enduring relationships with people based on your willingness to be vulnerable. I think you said early on, sometimes I worry I'm being too vulnerable. I think it's such a powerful approach to leadership. I really do.
Well, I think one of the things that another added to this complexity is, I think really the issue here is, as a nation, we're very divided when it comes to understanding what equity means, understanding what DEI means in this moment, understanding what inclusivity means, understanding all of that. And one thing that when I brought together all of these key community leaders into an advisory council, we were able to move away from this idea of what's happening in Montana, what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Connecticut. Let's stop listening to what the news is telling us what all these things mean. And let's really focus locally. What does equity mean for the students in the Anacortes School District? What does that mean for us? And what does gender identity mean in the Anacortes School District? And through our work and through those conversations, again, people might not agree with it, but now we have a common definition, and we're not relying on what Fox News or CNN is saying. We're actually defining it for us. And that's where you've got those, lack of a better word, the army of people who are able to go out into the community and say, no, I may not agree with it, but this is what it means in Anacortes. And so, and when I would have people come to me, whether it was controversies around masks or controversies around racial justice or George Floyd or police or whatever it might be, we were able to say, what does that mean for us locally? And what's happening in Anacortes? Oh no, what you're talking about is happening in Florida. Man, I'm not going to talk about that. What's happening here? What's happening here?
I think you're really bringing up something so smart, which is when you ask people, tell me about the state of education in America, they go, like from an A to F, D. You say, okay, what about in the state of Washington? Like maybe C or D. What about Anacortes? A. People love their schools. They love their communities, and they love their teachers, and they believe so fervently about the good things that are happening for their community. And so if you can make that sort of correction for everyone to say, we're going to talk about what do we believe? What are our beliefs, principles, and values of Anacortes? And, and how can I help lead that work together? Right.
Yep.
Then I think that's really smart. I think it's great advice for a new leader. Okay. So then this is sort of my last question, which is, so what was something that was good that came out of that? Clearly is something just so powerful. What else?
I think we have a shared vision. It's clear right now when controversy happens on Facebook and the keyboard warriors who are, spreading all these rumors on Facebook. What we have now is a group of people who are at the table, who are able to say firsthand, this is what's happening. And not only say what's happening, but point people to the resources that are provided by our district to help people understand and to shape the narrative. I believe we've gotten ahead of the narrative. We are an underfunded, under-resourced, overburdened school system. Every school system is. We don't have the time and the energy to be battling false narratives out there and to be dealing with the soup du jour of whatever's happening at the federal level. We have to stay focused and grounded in who we are as a community. And so if we can get ahead of the narrative, if we can engage our people, that's why this shared decision-making process was created in the first place, is for us to be really clear about who is at the table and so that they can be our best advocates, even if they disagree with our decision.
Our guest today was Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. And Justin, as I wrote little notes as you were talking, some of my takeaways, obviously the value and the importance of having a shared image or shared meaning, as you referred to it, the value of engaging in iterations because it allows a community, particularly leaders and the community as a whole, to make mid-course corrections if things aren't moving in the direction as you had sort of cast on where you want to be. The fact that your strategic plan and your own goals, if one were to go to your website, you can see the metrics that you have said. Here's what we have claimed to be the most important thing to pay attention to as we try to make good on these goals that we've put in place. The fact that you're not really talking about reclaiming a narrative. So many are trying to reclaim the narrative around public schools. What you have done is you've claimed it. And as a community, you're holding tight to what you're trying to do together. This has been such a joy. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's always great to reflect and they'll hear what other people's thoughts are. Thank you very much.